Well, I look
Yeah, you
like
look
fucking
good.
Saddam. I look like Saddam Hussein, so it's not very presentable.
That's okay. That's okay. Look, first of all, I really want to thank you. First of all, for the time, but more
No problem.
importantly, it's um, it's your work since I don't know, at least 10 years now, more than 10 years, was very important to me personally to change a lot of ways I would think I would see the world and my life, and
Thank you.
it led me to become the writer that I became, and I was lucky I'm successful, but mostly in France. And of course, I wanted to, I run, of course, a video channel to make my books, keeping them alive, and I keep sharing your articles
Yeah.
with my readers, which don't know you very well, in fact, because in France, maybe you're less well known than in the English speaking world.
Oh yeah. And in fact, because I'm not on message, I used to be published in Paris, but Le Monde, they blacked me out because I'm not on message. Obviously.
I know, I know. I also never go on main media like you. It's we are in the ghetto of Russia today, and the real
Yeah, but I,
media.
I have to. I read these assholes every day. I have to for professional reasons. I read Le Monde, Libé, Figaro all the time. But yeah, come on, it's ridiculous.
No, but
It's a
even
joke.
15 years ago, when I started following you I think you were with Tom Dispatch and Anti-War,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
and
Yeah,
of
yeah,
course then Asia Times. It really helped to. I was in business before, and I was like a businessman, and
yeah.
the goal in life was to make money and go around the world, and suddenly, with people like you, real journalists, and there's not many left anymore in the world. It helps a lot of
Everybody's dying.
exactly, and it really
uh,
helps a lot of people to understand the kind of world we are really in, and it's like you know uh, putting your shades out and suddenly seeing reality. So again, really, thank you very much on a
thank you.
personal level. Look,
Wonderful.
I,
Thanks.
I know we don't have a lot of time, so I just have a few questions.
Yeah, sure.
First of all, can you tell a little bit about yourself? Because a lot of my French readers don't really know you so much. What's your rough career,
Well,
sort of?
uh, short story. I am a nomad, global rover. I've been traveling since I was a teenager. I was born in Brazil. Two European families, one Spanish, one Dutch. I grew up between Brazil, the US, and Europe. So from the beginning, my mind was always around. I was too young to go to the Vietnam War, but it marked me a lot later on. It was an essential reason for me to become a journalist. Until I was like 16, 17, I still didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. I know I would write, but I was thinking about fiction. But then I started to realize that reality was much more interesting than fiction. So then when I was around 20, 21, I was already in college. I said, okay, maybe later on journalism. But first I need to travel to see a lot of stuff by myself. So I finished college. I spent 3 years in Europe traveling all over. Couldn't find a job because I had no experience. So I go back to Brazil and I started writing about arts and culture. My first, my first ever article. It's very, very funny. It was in 1979. 1979 was an article about women in film noir. Nothing to do with politics. Then later, I got a job at one of the big national papers, and it was great because I had total freedom and I became very well known, writing about music, cinema, literature, fashion, arts, pop music, you name it. So, but I had my eyes on politics all the time. And then I forced my way out in 1985. And I said, look, I want to become a foreign correspondent. I'm fed up with this shit. I'm going. And they say, no, you cannot go. And in the end, I went. So I started as a foreign correspondent in 85 in Europe. So I was based in London, in Paris, in Milan. Then I moved to California. I was based in LA. Back to Paris. So then in 1994, I made the fateful decision. I wanted to move to Asia. I was fed up with the West, with everything. And I wanted to, I've been to Asia before on the road. And I said, no, I need to live here and understand Asia from the inside. So in 1994, I moved from Paris to Asia. And then most of the time for the past 20 years, I've been based in Asia and working in this huge Pentagon-defined area, the arc of instability, right?
Yes.
From Northern Africa, Middle East, Eurasia, Central Asia, China, and my bases, Bangkok in Thailand and Hong Kong. That's the short of it.
And I was reading in I think when I was reading one of your books was Globalistan.
Yes, right. That was the 2007 book. Yeah.
You were telling the story of how you've been before the American invasion, let's say, an occupation of Afghanistan and Iraq. You've been even captured by Taliban at some point.
Yes. Yeah. Well, we were lucky because it was my first year with Asia Times. I knew them as a newspaper. They started as a newspaper in December 95. I was already living in Asia. I saw it in Singapore and I said, wow, this is a beautiful Asian paper. It looked gorgeous, you know, huge black and white photos, very well designed, very well edited. Printed in Singapore, Hong Kong, and Bangkok, and competing against the FT, against the Wall Street Journal, against the Herald Tribune. I said, well, one day I'm going to write for these guys. At the time, I was a correspondent for a big paper, so I had a job. So later on, a few years later, after the Asian financial crisis, after I had no job anymore because my paper didn't want to pay for a foreign correspondent in Asia, they were looking for correspondent Asia Times as a website, a small website. That's when I joined. And I was very lucky because before 9/11 happened, I was already there. I was between Islamabad, Peshawar, the tribal areas, and Afghanistan. So when 9/11 happened, come on, I was in the heart of in the thick of the action. And we had a correspondent in Karachi as well. So both of us were covering everything even before it happened. It was great.
And one of the you're one of the few, I must say, really few journalists around the world who has the reputation of independence and, of course, to also say the reality. And the question that comes with it is how can people figure out the difference between a real journalist and a prostitute?
Wow, it's reading and comparing information, essentially. And looking for consistency, looking for holes. Is this guy bought by so-and-so? Does he work for a think tank that follows so-and-so agenda? Is he being paid by a foreign intelligence service anywhere? It's easy to find out. You can actually see the way texts are articulated. What kind of agenda is behind it? In my own particular case, because I don't have a direct dog in this global fight, the imperial fight on all sides, I grew up as as a global nomad, as I told you. I consider myself a citizen of the world, and my personal interest is trying to find the truth behind big stories. Financial competition, bloc competition, the West against the East, Russia and China against the US or NATO, that kind of stuff. So, and I don't work for a think tank. I can't afford to be totally independent. I always wanted to be like this. Even when I worked for corporate media, in the case of the big Brazilian papers, usually I left because I said, no, okay, you don't want me like this, I'm out. That's it. But it's a hard choice. You have to live with the consequences, right? So you can have financial instability. You never know what's going to happen next year. You never. With Asia Times was great because from the beginning I could see, well, these guys are different. If they give me total freedom, which is the case, from day one they said, you can write anything you want. And after 9/11, we started to get a lot of readers in the West, especially in North America, in the US and Canada, because we were telling the story how it was. It was not on ideological bias like the American papers are covering.
Yeah.
But you have to pay a huge price for your independence all over the world. And I have many friends who suffered or still suffer a lot from it, or they need a day job to pay their bills. You name it.
Yeah.
You know.
Interestingly, as I was discussing exactly this topic with Noam Chomsky in an interview recently, and as you know, he talks a lot since the beginning about manufacturing consent.
Yes,
and,
yes.
And a lot of people who want to be informed, and as you said, who need to make the effort, today are shaping their opinion in different media than the mainstream media. They go to Russia Insider, a lot of these, as you say, Asia Times, a lot of these anti-war
websites. Yeah.
And do you see the risk that even those new media eventually are taken by the rot of the empire and the media corporations, and also try and become part of the consent manufacturing machine?
Yes. In fact, some successful blogs or bloggers or websites, they are taken over, or directly or indirectly. But I would say that the websites and the blogs that have established a reputation of independence, they remain so. And they are trusted by, huge global audience, especially young people. Young people, they don't read papers anymore. They don't watch TV, not even cable news. They go on the net and they go for independent sources of information. So these are the people we need to reach and we need to talk to. And we need to inform them as well. So lots of background stories have to be long, because you have to provide the context. It's very complicated, for instance, to talk about a pipeline deal if you don't know the context, if you don't know the players, where the money is coming from, you name it. It is complicated. But I've noticed with my interactions with younger and very young readers, they are really interested. Mm-hmm. They are looking for this kind of information that they know they won't find in corporate media anywhere.
Yeah, no, I agree. Now, indeed, in the first book I read, Globalistan, you mentioned that at the time you mentioned that we're going to towards liquid war.
Yeah.
Almost a decade after that book, almost, or maybe not a decade, but how do you see that liquid war?
Yeah, over 7 years. You're right.
How did you see it playing out?
I took the concept from what I read by Bauman. And obviously by my interactions with the pipeline wars. So liquid war in terms of oil, a little bit of gas as well as a metaphor, but also liquid in terms of being very fast and you cannot apprehend it. I would say the liquid war it's all over the place. At the time was mostly concentrated in Central Asia, because the Americans wanted to take over the pipeline wars in Central Asia. In fact, they didn't get anything apart from building that pipeline from Baku to Ceyhan in Turkey, the BTC. That was their only success in terms of the pipeline wars. And the winners most of the time were the Russians and the Chinese, or both, in fact. And this still, and now the Middle East is part of it, because of one of the key reasons for the Syria war is a competing pipeline strategy. One from Saudi Arabia and Qatar, and the other one from Iran and Syria. So was hardly, if ever, mentioned in US corporate media, especially. It was up to us, the independents, to explain the story over the past few years, right?
Yeah.
So yes, and the liquid war is financial as well. It's a mobility war. It's the inequality war. It's very liquid. I would say the liquid modernity elites, the 0.00.1%, they are liquid in the sense that they are controlling the whole thing, and it's very, very fast, and a lot of people don't see how they do it. And at the same time, the mobility from the bottom to the top is, in terms of the West, it's over.
Yeah.
Most European countries, North America, you see this mobility, in the developing world. You see it in China, you see it in Brazil, you see it in Russia, you see it in India, you see it in Turkey, Indonesia, South Korea, but that's it. Developing world. In the developed world, mobility, social mobility, financial mobility is over practically.
Yeah.
So yes, it's much more compared to when I wrote the book in 2007. I was based on what I had seen since the beginning of the Bush administration, early 2001, and now it's much more exacerbated, I would say, in terms of inequality, in terms of the speed of the contradictions. No?
And do you see this? Of course, it plays out also in Ukraine and in Iraq, and
of course, oh yeah, yeah. These are subplots of the big story.
Yeah, and do you see this evolution of this, which is going to lead to what you describe in your latest book? I've ordered a few days ago. I haven't received it yet. Empire of Chaos.
You can get a Kindle in 1 minute.
But I like paper. I'm old style.
And it's very cheap on top of it.
I know, but I really like paper. I like to write on it and keep.
Me too. I come from the paper civilization.
Yeah, me too. I'm too old already. But certainly moving into the Empire of Chaos.
Yes.
And maybe you can tell us a little bit of that book. But also, do you think we moved from this Globalistan and liquid war to Empire of Chaos because of evil and cunning plan or total incompetence? And can you tell us a little bit about your book?
I don't think it's an evil, cunning plan with a Dr. Evil behind it all. Not at all. I think it's because the system thrives on chaos and promotes chaos all over, and at the same time is hit by chaos blowback from all over. The entropy of the system is so crazy that nobody can control it. I don't see an overarching entity controlling it all. They don't even know. In fact, you know, when you talk to a lot of Wall Street players, they don't know how they are into mega speed, mega deals in a click. That's the only thing they see. They don't see the big picture. If you talk to the US Treasury, they see a little bit of the big picture because they say, look, we don't have money to pay our bills. What are we going to do? Let's print money. So, but this is a short-term solution. They cannot do this for the next decade. Mm-hmm. I would say that the people who are looking at the big picture in the long term are the Russians and the Chinese. That's why I follow them very, very closely. The way I see their leadership, they are already planning for the 2020s and 2030s. It's a completely different mindset compared to the European Union, which is a joke. You know it very well. You live in Europe. And I followed Brussels a lot, especially in the 90s. We know the nightmare, the bureaucratic Kafkian nightmare it is. And it's not going anywhere. And in Washington, in Wall Street, they are terrified because they are seeing that the unipolar moment is vanishing. Fast, in fact. When they look at the BRICS, when they look at inside the G20, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, non-aligned movement, moves to get away from the petrodollar, currency swaps, you name it. They are desperate, so they cannot see the big picture.
So it's a scared, chaotic people who create this empire of chaos that you talk about in your latest book.
Exactly. I would say, Piero, I think one of the best graphic illustrations is the 2008 financial crisis, which was created by a chaotic casino capitalism mentality. And you had repercussions all over the world and blowback to a lot of banks in the US, banks in Europe, you name people who lost all their savings from night to day, you name it.
Yeah.
This was chaos engendering chaos.
No, and one I was interested. You were talking with Peter Lavelle in a show on Russia Today recently about what is happening in Syria and Iraq, where basically whatever it's called, ISIS, Daesh, whatever is the real name, it changes every few months. Those people which have been trained, given weapon to by the empire, are now sort of used as an excuse to try to manage again this sort of chaos and further chaos that happens, and the suffering of people in those regions. I mean, Iraq is 30 years war. And Syria.
It's a 30 years war.
I was lucky to know Syria quite well. I was working at some point there not so long ago, and that country has been completely destroyed. And the suffering,
the social fabric was destroyed. Yeah,
and this catastrophe after catastrophe after catastrophe. How do you see this moving on over the next few years? How this chaos is going? What is this chaos going to lead to, according to you?
Considering the mindset of the elites in Washington, it could get much worse. I would say if we have when you have this Republican majority Senate starting in January, oh my God, these people this is a bunch of serious nutcases. So they will increase chaos in Ukraine, Russian Western borders.
Africa.
They will increase chaos in Africa. They will increase chaos in Syria, Iraq, you name it. And they're going to pick a fight with Venezuela all over again. You name it. We know how they think. You know, there are no surprises there. And in starting 2016, depending on if we have like Hillary against Jeb Bush, starting in 2017, we're going to have an even more frightening scenario in Washington. Because basically it's it's the same warmongering party with two heads. Any one of these two it's going to be a certified nightmare, especially for the developing world, against Russia, against China, against BRICS, and reconquering the Middle East all over again. You name it. It's a disaster.
All that with money that they don't have and that they have to print.
With the money they don't have, that they'll keep printing. Until what? Until, I would say, personally, I think that the breaking point would be, it's going to take a while. Maybe it's going to take a full decade. Perhaps 7, 8 years. When the move away from the petrodollar is irreversible. When you have most of the major oil and gas producers trading in their own currencies or in a basket of currencies, and some of them eliminating the petrodollar altogether. Then the real house of cards in the US will collapse. It could happen by 2020, 2025, which, by the way, is very funny. 2025 is when the Chinese are planning to finish their Eurasian integration with pipelines, high-speed rail, ports, everything, which means the new center of global commerce is Eurasia as a whole and the Chinese in the driving seat. Can you imagine how these people in Washington are going to take this?
Not good.
Not good.
No. Well, this is what I write, by the way, in my books, and maybe if you find the address where I can send you one, I'll send you one, of course.
Send me a digital copy.
I have one. Yes.
For me, it's much easier because I move around a lot. I read a lot on the Kindle, you know.
I do that. I cannot sign it though. But anyway, the book, my first book, which was a successful one, the most successful one so far, was called "Survive the Economic Collapse." And my thesis is that in the next decade, we are all these house of cards, as you're saying, this financial meltdown in the making, and crazy currency printing, the depletion of resources and oil scarcity, and you can see this fake shale tight oil play, which is really a short-term solution. And of course, not to mention the ecological, but also the physical problems with food production and water scarcity around the world. All this is converging into a time frame of 10 years that I think, my theory is that it will provide a full economic collapse, at least of countries who are not ready. And you're right, maybe Russia and China and some other countries in the world are better suited to withstand to that. But certainly the West and Europe has made the wrong bet to bet on, well, I don't think we had any, well, I'm not in Europe, I'm Switzerland. But they bet with the wrong horse. They've been sucked as part of the empire, and Europe will collapse with the United States as well.
There's no question. There's no question.
And obviously how you explained a bit how you see this play out, but is there a risk that the reaction of such a childish mentality from United States politicians can lead to a very massive global war?
Yes. Oh yeah. I don't doubt it for a minute. There are a lot of Doctor Strange loves in that beltway environment. In fact, this guy who's going to be probably the next head of the Pentagon, Carter, he is a mini Doctor Strangelove. His profile is extremely scary. He is a warmonger, essentially, much more than Chuck Hagel. Chuck Hagel is a guy you could discuss with. This guy, it's different. It's my way or the highway. So this is just one small example. And the Pentagon is gaining everything you can imagine. The problem is everything that they gain, the results for them are really bad. They gained the war against Iran, and they lost. I can remember at least 5 different scenarios. They lost all 5 scenarios in trying to provoke a confrontation around the Straits of Hormuz against Iran. Yeah. So can you imagine against Russia? Russia now, they have a nuclear superiority against the US.
Yes.
They have the best missiles in the world, which the US has nothing against. They have the best fighter planes. They're going to transfer a lot of stuff to the Chinese. The Chinese are building an underground submarine base in Hainan Island. When this thing is ready, it's going to be probably 3-4 years. They're going to run the South China Sea.
Yes.
Whatever the US wants to do, you know. So the potential for a confrontation, I would say, in the next decade is extremely worrying, to say the least. I agree with you. It is terrifying, in fact. Especially considering what kind of people will be leading the US in the next 4, 5, 6, 8 years. These 2 characters we were mentioning before. The Hydra with 2 heads of the same warmongering establishment.
So where should we all move to live?
I have a lot of options. When people ask us, look, south of Brazil is perfect. Uruguay is one of the coolest countries in the world. In fact, a lot of Europeans are buying property in the world. A lot. Italians, Brits, French, Spanish, you know. Parts of Southeast Asia. Indonesia is a beautiful country. It's huge. 17,000 islands. You can find an island for yourself. Of course, there are many places scattered around the global south where you can escape the horror, you know, or at least you can see it from 10,000 kilometers away.
No, because the sad conclusion from what you say, of course, it doesn't need a lot to think that if there is a confrontation, you know, if Napoleon and Hitler couldn't win against Russia, Americans can.
Nobody, I would say, history has proved nobody can. And the Russians are resilient. They know how to defend themselves. Yeah. They don't accept defeat ever. And don't forget, they are nuclear armed now. It's a completely different ballgame.
And that's the point. And that's my point is, eventually, even if you're far away in Indonesia, if these guys start to now it's proxy wars, but if it becomes a real war,
if it becomes a direct war, exactly,
we're all in trouble because nukes don't know borders. Now,
no, exactly, yeah.
Now there is one option, and I wanted to know your opinion. How about the people? You think people can raise up and eventually revolution or secession? There's a lot of tension in the United States, including in the armed forces.
Yeah. But the way I see the problem in the US is the lack of organized political parties. You have to organize a instinctive revolutionary rebelling spirit in the US into organizations, and not top-down organizations, but political parties who can actually change the way everything is run in Washington. I don't see this happening in the short term, only very long term. American politics is $1 billion politics.
Yes.
That's the problem. You need $1 billion to be elected president. You need a few $100 million to become a senator. That's how it works. And obviously, you're working for Wall Street, you're working for ExxonMobil, you're working for Raytheon. It's not, as you said, it's not for the people.
No, exactly. Now, Russia and China have a very long and very successful experience in funding and creating movements, grassroots movements from the Cold War throughout the West. Could they
Yes.
restart that? Do you think?
I don't think it's in their interest. The way I see it at the moment, the Chinese long-term interest is to become, they already are, the number one global trade commerce power, which they already are,
Yes.
and increase from that. Get 300, 400 million peasants, from the countryside and move them to cities, so urbanize the country a little bit more, fight corruption, and maintain some sort of equilibrium. Okay, it's a global trading power, and the number one economic power in the world, which by PPP they already are, and in a few years by GDP as a whole. And the Russians, they want to fight the information war as well. If you see how they are, like virtually every month or every 2 or 3 months, there's a new website or expanded website or reformulation or more investment in the media war. They want to spread the Russian message, especially in English, all over the world, and say, look, we are a normal country. We don't eat the kids for breakfast, and we don't want to nuke Europe. Look at us. So for them, it's very, and also they want to do business all over Eurasia. That's how they propose the Eurasian Economic Union. Is very complementary to the new Silk Roads, the Chinese. They want to do business with everybody in the region. It's very simple. It's very, very simple. The Americans, when they look at this, they look at Eurasian integration, they freak out because they know they're being left out of the whole thing. It's the breakdown of the main storyline is very simple. Of course, the ramifications are extremely complex. But basically, it's this unipolar moment that lasted a few decades that is now vanishing. Wallerstein would say that the world system is changing, but not yet. We still don't know what comes next. And the emergence of these two big powers, Russia and China, which on top of it now have a strategic partnership. So you can imagine the old order when they look at the new emerging order. They have to freak out, man.
Yes. About Europe, do you see Europe growing a spine and throwing away, getting themselves away from American control, or they're just going to go down with them?
Unfortunately not, Piero. Not in the short run. Not with these politicians. Not with this mediocrity all over. Cameron, Hollande, Renzi, you name it, all of them. It's a bunch of midgets, political midgets, opportunists, all of them. I would say among the young people in different European countries, oh yes, we can expect maybe in the near future or medium term, maybe the next decade, popular movements and organizing themselves in political parties. There's no other way of doing it. We still live in Western liberal democracy, so these are the rules of the game. These rules are not going to change in the short or mid-term, right? But the problem is, the way Brussels is run, I'm sure you're familiar with it. When you spend some time in Brussels, you see how the EU, the EC is run. There's absolutely no future for that. It's absolutely impossible. And they don't even care what they're doing. The only thing that they care is about their pension plan. They want to retire and live in a tropical island, receiving 100% of their salary in euros. That's it.
It's the Soviet Union.
Yeah, it's the Soviet Union, but of course with the standard of living very, very high, right?
Yeah.
But it reminds me of the Soviet Union with the Gucci Hermenegildo Zenha facade, That's the only difference.
Yeah, no, unfortunately. Well, anyway, and one last thing, I wanted to say hi to you from, I think we have a fellow friend in Canada who, he tell me you know him from suggesting that the liquid war is very like Dune, the spice from Frank Herbert in science fiction.
Oh, yeah, I love this analogy. Wonderful.
Yeah. And anyway, so look, I think you have a call in 10 minutes, so I don't want to take too much time. Thank you very much for your time. Anyway,
Piero, it was a pleasure.
I'll get my editor to send you I don't know how Kindle works, so I guess he'll send you an electronic version. And for sure, keep what you're doing, keep up what you're doing. There's a lot of people around the world. We listen, and keep being the way you are. You're very incisive and
Thank you, Piero. Look, I'll send you a PDF of my book.
Oh, Well, so I have both.
Okay.
I
No,
have
you don't have
paper
to copy. You download the PDF. You can read anywhere you want.
Good, good, good.